should just get started. So welcome to this webinar series on the role of language and sustainable development. This is our second run of talks in the series, and we're really delighted that so many people are joining us today. I'm Colin Riley from the University of Essex, and these webinars are being run by the Bringing the Outside In research team, which is a network of linguists working at the universities of Essex, Botswana, Tanzania, and Zambia. And we're funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund and the British Academy. In our research, we're aiming to understand what roles the multiple languages that learners use outside of the classroom can or should influence in learning within the classroom, where usually only one medium of instruction is used. So the aim of our webinar series is to bring together similar projects with a focus on language to see what type of research is going on, what impact and results are emerging, and whether there are any synergies that can be drawn, and also on a more practical level to provide an opportunity to discuss some of the practical aspects of conducting South-North research. So for other upcoming talks in our series and recordings of all of our previous talks, please have a look at our website during the talk, but do feel free to use the chat box for any questions you have or for any discussion during the talk. And we'll use the chat box after the talk for questions, and we'll aim to be finished by 1 p.m. So today, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Friederike Lüpke, Jérémi Sagna, and Miriam Weidl from the University of Helsinki, where Friederike is a professor of African Studies. Jérémi is a technical assistant in the Department of Languages, and Miriam is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Languages. And their talk today is titled Inclusive Multilingual Literacy, the LILIEMA Model. So I will pass over to them just now, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Okay, thank you very much for this kind introduction and the invitation to this talk series. I've followed most of the talks in the first series and your research very closely, and they're both very inspiring. So we're very happy to have this forum here today. I don't need to introduce us further, so let's dig into the subject straight away. And let me provide a little bit of a general backdrop for those of you who are not Africanists or not so familiar with the African situation. When we talk about education and literacy in Africa, and especially formal education and formal literacy, there is a huge paradox. And the paradox is that 80% of Africans, according to UNESCO, are educated in languages that they don't speak. And you can see this contradiction quite clearly when you look at the map on the right-hand side with the languages that are official languages and used in formal education. And there are about a dozen languages. And compare it to the figure on the left-hand side, the 2,700 languages that are spoken on the African continents. These are not reflected in formal education contexts, bar a limited number of exceptions. But schools and universities teach almost exclusively in colonial languages. And by colonial languages, I mean here both languages of the former colonial powers and standard versions of big African languages, which were also standardized in colonial times. So these are both colonial visions of language, if you want. And to make things worse, these languages are not taught as subjects. So many children and learners do not use these languages and have no knowledge of these languages because they're not used outside school, but at the same time, they're not taught as subjects in the classroom. So children, for instance, have to acquire literacy and numeracy while at the same time learning the languages that are the medium of instructions. And as you can imagine, the results are pretty bad: high dropout rates, rampant linguistic discrimination, the exclusion of civic participation of a majority of the population, and education systems that factually only cater for small elites that master the colonial languages. Now, if we move to the context where we work, the Casamance region in southern Senegal, we are operating in a very multilingual region, which is not atypical for African settings in general. So if we look at languages and only take the official context into account, it appears very monolingual. French is the only language that has official status. If you look at languages that are used in religious institutions, we get a little bit more diversity. We have Arabic as the language of Islam with its own script. And we have a number of larger languages that are used in churches. And these are flanked by languages with larger speaker bases that are used for wider communication and translocal contexts. But if you look at the local level, we find a very high number of named languages that are spoken either in one village or in a very limited number of villages. And also, we have a large degree of fluidity. So linguistic features are very variable. They can be associated with several languages. People can tap into more local identities, but also scale up and evoke more regional identities through their linguistic behavior. But the smaller the languages that people speak, the more multilingual they are. And this means that spaces are internally always heterogeneous, even though they can be associated with one language. So this is what we have symbolized here on this slide. You can see places symbolized with a circle. And very often the places can be associated with one language, which is very often the language of the founders or of the remembered founders. And this is often the language that would be chosen for a literacy campaign if only one language would be selected. But the places are not homogeneous because there are very long-standing traditions of cohabiting. Founders are known in West Africa for systematically hosting strangers and members of professional groups. There are intense marriage exchanges, so that very diverse people end up living together. And also people are extremely mobile for a variety of reasons. So this means that successful literacy and education campaigns that really do not exclude anybody need to take account of this internal diversity. If we look at existing literacy in local languages of Senegal, we find actually that grassroots writing has a flexibility that makes it rather inclusive. So grassroots writing in general follows one lead language and transfers the spelling conventions of this lead language to entire repertoires. That's a very ergonomic way of writing repertoires in very complex contexts. And you can see an example here. So we also operate in a cross-border area, which makes things even more complex. 3 different colonial powers. And so if you take one family name, the one of the notorious former dictator ruler of the Gambia, Jammeh, it would be written following French lead spelling in Senegal, former French colony, English following English spelling rules in English-speaking Gambia, and following Portuguese spelling rules in Lusophone Guinea-Bissau. However, there is an official alphabet for languages of Senegal. It is actually also a potential lead language alphabet because it follows the conventions of the alphabet that was created for Wolof, the largest language of Senegal. And some national languages are used in primary education in a limited number of schools in the north of the country using this alphabet. These are mainly big languages like Wolof, Serer, Pular. And adult literacy campaigns are also conducted, but they're very spurious. But what we want to retain here is that the official alphabet of Senegal can be used as a lead language writing model that follows the spirit of the grassroots writing that has been practiced for a very long time and is still informally practiced. And now over to Miriam to introduce the LILIEMA program.
Okay, thank you very much, Friederike. I will introduce you to two multilingual speakers and a very multilingual translanguaging situation in Senegal right now, so that you can understand what is our context. And then me and Jérémi will talk a bit more about the LILIEMA project. So these two women are both inhabitants of Dibonker, a village where we are active with LILIEMA, and they're down there. You can see their self-reported linguistic repertoires. Their repertoires are very rich, and both of them have different languages of identity, but it depends a bit in what context they talk about that identity languages. For example, the left woman, Odile, identifies as Njago because she's from Guinea-Bissau, but she actually, in the household where she lives today, she doesn't speak much Njago. She only speaks it when she gets phone calls. There, she reports that she mainly speaks Bainungubaha and sometimes some Jolafoni with Hadi, who is the lady to the right. Hadi, she identifies as Jola Buluf and says she speaks mainly Jola Buluf in the household. However, uses sometimes some Bainungubaha. I have to say Bainungubaha is the language of identity from both of their husbands and also the patrimonial language of the village. So many people in the village identify with this language. And it is really, their husbands really like this language to be spoken within the family. But she says she speaks Jola Buluf most because this is how she feels most comfortable, and also speaks many other languages, also, for example, Sarahule and Sose, because she had 2 kids with another man before, and they had learned to speak Sarahule and Sose, something that she didn't report to me as one of her languages in her multilingual repertoire for about 2 years, because she felt that this is out of context and I don't need to know that. But at some point with a lot of conversations, things get more and more complex and more interesting. So what I want to show you today is a normal day, some seconds of a normal daily conversation of one of this household. The women are present there. You can see LOG and case 2. These are these 2 participants. And there are 2 guests present. One of them is me. But you can't hear me, so you can't hear me or the driver coming here with the motor. And then there's another guest, IPS. But except that, all the people sitting there are family members and they're really used to speaking to each other. So there's not a situation that would be very special. So I just want to show you a video that shows how multilingual their conversations are, so you can get an idea of this multilingualism.
Est-ce que frère
So as you could see, these situations are highly multilingual, and even if you don't read the transcriptions, you can see it, many languages were used, and it is a very natural way to communicate. So what we want to show you now is how we integrate all of this knowledge we have from these multilingual situations into our LILIEMA project. And I'll tell you a bit more about the LILIEMA model and the association, and also Jérémi will tell you a bit more. So our method and approach are actually grounded in multilingual oral and written practices like we have just showed you, and inspired by grassroots practices and based on our understanding of these everyday multilingual language use in the lower Casamance and the experiences we have collected while transcribing and analyzing multilingual data. We have jointly developed this new multilingual approach to literacy. And within the LILIEMA program, we create resources that allow a repertoire-based literacies. So rather than learning to read and write in one single language only, our learners read and write in all the languages they have in their repertoires. And we use a clear letter-sound correspondence and the same characters and spelling conventions for all the languages that are present. So no language can be excluded. The method is, like Friederike already said, based on the official orthography of for Wolof, the most used language in Senegal, and the official alphabet for Senegalese languages, which was developed by Arame Fall. And here on this picture, you can see the method in practice. One of our teachers, Emma Biaghi, he sent a message based on French into our LILIEMA WhatsApp chat group saying Retour de Dar es Salaam, c'était trop cool, using a clear letter sound correspondence and the LILIEMA method to write a French sentence. Jérémi will tell you a bit more about our team and project.
I will now introduce the LILIEMA Association, the team, and our program. The LILIEMA team is very special because its members have different backgrounds which mutually enrich one another. Today, the core team consists of 10 people. Alpha Nabimane is the president of LILIEMA. The person marked in orange are responsible for the organization in Finland and Senegal, as well as the research that is conducted in the villages where LILIEMA is taught. In blue, you can see our LILIEMA teachers, and in purple, 2 trainees to become teachers as well. All the Senegalese team members lived most of their life in the Casamance, Senegal, which is the area where we are active. We are all highly multilingual, and our repertoires vary, covering most of the languages represented in the area. Currently, we are mainly active in 7 villages in the Casamance, Senegal, west and east of the regional capital, Ziguinchor. The villages are not far from each other. From Dar es Salaam to Sindon, it is only about 35 kilometers, but they are still highly diverse. To cover most of the languages in the villages, adapt to local diversity in a respectful way, we have representatives for all the villages. Our program is very versatile. At the moment, we offer multilingual language courses, cultural days, workshops, LILIEMA online training for everybody who is interested. In 2020, we additionally started a multilingual COVID-19 health information campaign. Currently, we include over 12 languages in our LILIEMA courses and our COVID-19 campaign. But this is work in progress, and the number increases since we don't exclude any languages. Here you can see a video from a LILIEMA course. I want you to pay attention on how multilingual this short conversation is. The languages used orally are marked in the video.
Dohulo, Ndo, Uda, Uya, Loko, Uya, 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 Loko. Nah, apa itu? Uya, adik lah, kasa. Udah, Uya. Udah, Uya.
And you can see here all the written text is highly multilingual.
So this kind of multilingual literacy is used throughout our courses and by the teachers and course participants, and also a lot of multilingual texts are produced, but not necessarily all texts are multilingual, but LILIEMA gives the participants the chance to write in whatever language is within their repertoires. So I would want to read some feedback from our course attendees to you. This is feedback from René, who attended LILIEMA courses in level 1 and level 2. So he attended quite a lot of courses already. And he said, there was a time after school when I rarely wrote anything, but after going back to LILIEMA, I started to write and read again, do everything. It really impacted my life. Now I can write all of the languages with LILIEMA. If it is Bainung, Creole, Jola, Pearl, Wolof, I will write it. I am the responsible for the church here. I'm writing everything in Creole, but now even the French is not confusing me anymore. But before I did not practice until I really had problems with French in practicing it. I can read it very slowly, but practicing writing and speaking was really tiring for me. Since I come to LILIEMA courses, even this is getting better again. And then I want to show you another feedback from Chachi, who talks about his son, who is in the CM2, so 10 or 11 years old. And he says, this month, I wrote down what I need for my animals, what food, what medicine, when they get sick. I wrote in Bayot, but I also used Foni, Wolof, and French because they have better words sometimes. My son, who is in the CM2, saw it, read it, and understood. I was surprised. So as you can see, we get really positive feedback from our course participants. And what was also very positive is that they also use the LILIEMA method outside of the courses, and they give it to their family members and friends. So when the corona pandemic started, our teachers and supervisors quickly realized the need to get active. So we used our capacity to develop a multilingual COVID-19 information campaign. We used the competences of the LILIEMA team to so far create 12 multilingual posters and leaflets covering the official information on the virus. The information of the Senegalese government is only distributed in rather complex French. So we first simplify the information in French, not changing the content, but in example, not using expert terminology, and then created the same information in local languages to inform the people in a way they can understand. The information is primarily distributed through print media, since in this region, many people do not have access to internet or to electricity. All of our media have the aim to reach as many people as possible. Each poster, for example, illustrates the information through its design. So even illiterate people should get a hint what to do and what not. Each poster represents 6 languages, which are the languages most used in the villages where they are distributed. And if more languages are present in the villages, then we use several posters. However, it is not always easy to create the correct content in all the languages. So let me give you a rather simple example. On this poster, we wanted to cover to share the information, cover your nose and mouth with your arm when sneezing or coughing. So the problem there was that in many of the Senegalese languages, they use the same lexeme for arm and hand. So if we would just translate the information, we would actually tell people to sneeze in their hand or arm, which is counterproductive. So we had to come up with different solutions that fit the languages and describe the information rather than only translate it. So in this case, we used a phrase like we cough and sneeze in our elbow or into a tissue. While the pandemic happened, we weren't able to go to Senegal, so we also did some remote research. It wasn't really remote because part of our team lives in Senegal, so they did. So we did the research together, and therefore we had different quantitative and qualitative questionnaires to assess the needs and comprehension of our materials, to measure the impact, to see how people feel about the materials, also in what languages the materials get accessed and what else could be needed. And this was all, that was all organized via telephone or with a lot of distance within Senegal, and respecting the corona masks and things like that. So let me show you some of our research results. So far, we have distributed over 2,000 posters and leaflets in 16 villages, displaying the information in 12 different languages. And therefore, we use different places in the villages, but also strategically important places like local shops and bus stops. So we have reached several thousand people with our COVID-19 campaign. And to evaluate this impact, we had the questionnaires, including a survey with over 700 participants. These participants were picked randomly in the 16 villages and were asked if they accessed the information, and over 82% said that they accessed and understood the information on our posters and leaflets. And of these 82%, 99.7% of participants stated that the LILIEMA COVID-19 campaign definitely increased their knowledge of COVID-19 prevention measures, and that they would like to receive more information in a multilingual way, which was, of course, a great result for us. Okay, so I think Friederike will sum up.
Yes. So the main features of the LILIEMA program are that our methods are informed by research, but also by the local knowledge and expertise of our local research participants who have become teachers, trainers, and experts. So this is not a solution brought in from the outside, but this is something that is created jointly by participants with different expertise. And this means that it can really include everybody, because it can reflect generally the fluid and multilingual linguistic realities of speakers. And it valorizes their local and regional knowledge by also giving them the choice to use their languages in whichever language mode they desire. So they can use fluid translanguaging, but if they feel they want to stay within the boundaries of a monolingual language mode, they can do so. And the power is with them to really use literacy in the way that corresponds to their needs and their networks. And this means that LILIEMA also spreads through its readers and writers who include their families, their networks, start writing WhatsApp messages, share texts and lesson notes. And so actually create a wider network of LILIEMA readers. And to sum up and also include the lessons that we have learned through our COVID campaign is that in contexts like the Lower Casamance, for inclusive literacy education, but also crisis communication, only inclusive and flexible multilingual models can reach everybody. And until they're implemented, I think most Africans will read and write official or colonial languages only, because these are the only languages that convey prestige. If people in Casamance would be forced, for instance, to have mother tongue education in Wolof, which is a solution that is currently being proposed by UNESCO, this would not make any difference to, you know, the current situation where French is used. It would not create more inclusion. And at the same time, also crisis communication needs to be tailored to multilingual repertoires and also aware of the modalities in which languages are used. So we were only able to use written crisis communication for our COVID campaign because we had previously run the LILIEMA literacy program. Without that, we would have actually created a message in a bottle, a message that cannot be accessed because there wouldn't have been any readers for it. So a focus away from the message and onto the medium in which it can be conveyed and trusted, and long-term work that includes the intended recipients to create meaningful communication channels are very important factors for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's really nice, very stimulating talk. I would like to invite the participants to pose their questions through the chat. So if you have any questions, then you can pop them in the chat and I can pass them along. So I'm happy to sort of get the ball rolling a little bit and ask maybe two slightly related questions. I'm curious about what the literacy levels are in terms of the COVID campaign. So, and I wonder whether, obviously you've been working with these communities and trying to increase literacy, and is it the case that the uptake was so good and that their literacy was already at a stage such that, maybe because of the orthography that you used, such that they were able to, you know, learn to read very quickly, so that this was useful to do this kind of thing in the written form? Because it's one of the things that certainly in my context, I always find that oral language is of course so much higher and it's so much easier, and reading is always a bit of a problem. Also with tone languages where people do double takes and 3 takes and stuff like that. So I was wondering about stuff to do with literacy. And then the second thing is related to something you mentioned in terms of translanguaging. How much of that is going on in the context, and also in terms of the posters that you presented? Would if people do translanguage when they speak, would there be an expectation that this message about COVID would reflect that as well, in contrast to every language being in a sort of different box, which is really, you know, extremely impressive without a doubt. But I just wondered whether there was an expectation of, does this sound like how I speak for the sort of community?
I can answer the second question. Mia, would you like to answer the first, or shall I start and you and Dodo add?
Both is fine. I can start. Yes, so I think your question about the literacy, I think it is easier for people to access this information because, well, as Friederike has said, many people go to school for a very limited amount of time, or they go to school and they are there for several years, but they can't really follow the content because maybe their level of French isn't good enough, or maybe there's other things, maybe they have working responsibilities at home and don't go to school regularly, maybe they dropped out early. So actually when they get out of school, their self-confidence to use French and use French, especially in written, is very low. And also literacy practice or literacy is not used that much in the daily lives of the people. It's not that people would read the newspaper every day in these villages. That's rather an exception if that happens. So people just stop to use literacy because they don't feel confident, and because they have experiences that when they use French and make a mistake, they are criticized. So it's quite shocking for them. But that doesn't mean that they can't read the letters. So when they see this multilingual information, I think it's easier for them to access, because maybe they can read and understand the French part. Maybe they don't understand all of the French words, but then they still have several possibilities. And they might find their languages or languages they identify with, languages that are in their repertoire, and then they can access the information more easily.
To add to that, so we noticed that there is a difference between people who have never experienced writing And we actually need to cater for these people separately. So we clearly need to add another level that also focus on motor skills, for instance, and letter recognition, and that we haven't done. So in a way, we actually, our courses are designed for people who have already varying levels of literacy experience. And yes, they then learn very quickly. And the reason why we chose written information for the COVID campaign is that other channels are actually, apart from radio, where actually there are local activists who broadcast information in various local languages. It's very difficult to disseminate information because people don't have electricity or enough money to access the internet. So you couldn't just post YouTube videos, etc., or share WhatsApp messages easily with spoken messages. But so the translanguaging question. So even if, people, languages as bounded entities have an important role for people. Although, of course, the boundaries are always a matter of perspective, because these languages, many of them are closely related. So they have many cognate forms or even identical forms. And even the languages that are not really closely related share, of course, forms.
Yeah.
And so even if a text is intended to be within a confined language, it always contains polyvalent elements that can be categorized differently. And but people are really used, for instance, to contexts that are translanguaging, as shown in the video, but also to kind of monolingual or multilingual contexts where the languages are kept separate. So they are also multilingual in different types of multilingualism, so to speak. So for instance, in village assemblies, when important information is conveyed, very often you have a translation context where different languages are intended to be used. And of course, within that, you have fluid translanguaging as well, depending, because the languages are not standardized. So depending on how people use these languages, but the intention is to have language A, language B, language C, and then translate. And so the posters are actually they reflect a common strategy to convey information. And people, of course, also have, the repertoires vary in terms of the composition. And so it's a very useful strategy, as our surveys have shown, to represent this information in several languages, because people actually consume it in several languages to put together the meaning. So one language, even if it's the language of identity, or let's say something like the L1, would probably not be enough, because people are so mobile that, they may not have spoken that language for a long time, for instance. But having this information in several languages then enables this comprehension.
Okay, so whilst we're on the topic of sort of their learning and the context, I have a couple of questions here. Could this approach be adopted to a context where participants have essentially no exposure to written language? And maybe when you sort of have finished with that, you could comment a little bit on what kind of investment of resources in terms of time and personnel are necessary to set up this kind of program. And maybe I'll just add a third question because it's related to that for somebody else. Can this kind of learning also be easily possibly translated into a school context that is attended by multilingual children?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Oh, can you repeat the first question again?
Okay, sorry. So how could this approach be adopted in a context where participants have no exposure to written language?
I can start with that. So we actually experimented with that a bit. So we had a level where, for instance, we introduced the letters and the sound correspondences, and then we had exercises actually, like in primary school, to recognizing letters, identifying letters, retracing letters, and then first writing exercises. But we were not really able to incorporate this into the program yet because we lacked the resources. So for that, we would really need sustainable funding. But it is definitely something that we would love to do. And we also we have seen there's a keen interest of people you have no literacy and who want to participate. So definitely something we want to venture into.
Yeah.
And then the other question was, can we imagine this in the formal school context?
Yeah.
The problem is that so the LILIEMA method is not based on standard literacy. And that gives it its power because it sets the writers free.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot make mistakes. The languages are theirs, you know? And so if conventions emerge, as in these grassroots literacies that have been attested since Adjami writing, but also in these informal literacies, these conventions emerge bottom up through networks, right? Frequency of particular spellings. So the problem is when we transfer this into the formal school context, we transfer it to a context where language is used for social selection and assessment.
Right.
And hence, formal school contexts are very often based on standard language. And that is incompatible with the spirit of the LILIEMA program. However, it is, of course, possible for LILIEMA learners, to easily transfer to a standard-based literacy program in one of the languages that use this alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem, I think, Clyde Ancano showed in her talk in the last seminar series, how difficult it actually is to introduce standard-based literacies for languages of the Gambia, because all the prerequisites, so even if there is the willingness to introduce a standard literacy, all the prerequisites are lacking, like, teaching materials, trained teachers, dictionaries that actually, list the standard forms. So the standard in itself is an illusion, I think, in most of the learning contexts at the moment.
Yeah, well, really good. Another question here on, you talked a little bit about that maybe bandwidth and internet issues, but could you comment on, somebody asked, on the use of social media and texting, and whether maybe that would be a useful tool?
I can comment on that. It definitely is, and we also use it a lot, and we encourage it within our multilingual courses. But it is not a possibility for everybody, and especially not a possibility all the time, because data packages are very expensive. So people only sometimes buy them, and then of course use things like WhatsApp and Facebook, but it's nothing that people regularly use. And also there are villages without electricity, so sometimes people only charge their phone once a week somewhere else, or there are power cuts. So these literacy practices are really used a lot, and we have WhatsApp groups where we do that, and we use it on Facebook a lot. But it is not something that would include everybody. So this is why our courses, it was really important for us that our courses are in a way that people feel well there. And if we would have it as a precondition that people need to have a phone or something like that, it would be more difficult. So for example, when we have our courses, we made a big mistake at the beginning, and we tried to talk to the directors of local schools, because we thought it would be very practical to use the school rooms to teach LILIEMA there. But actually, people were very interested in LILIEMA, but then nobody showed up to the courses. And then it took us a couple of days or even weeks until we found out what happened. And then people said like, oh, this is just not a context where I want to go. I don't want to go in a closed room where I have this teaching learning experience, because I've made bad experiences there. So now we're teaching just somewhere in a public space, and we bring our own blackboard, and that's all, and everybody brings his or her chair, and then that's where we teach. So people feel more comfortable in that way. And if people would like to use social media, we do it. And Jérémi also teaches an online LILIEMA course now. So we use all of this media as well.
Oh, sounds really, really good. Bring your own chair. Very nice. Many questions are coming in here. I have a comment and a question from Pius Akumbu, who says, wonderful project and talk, excellent. The possibility of empowering people to develop and use their languages is highly welcome. I wonder whether literacy in a language of wider communication, such as Wolof, which is acquired by most people, would differ from literacy in French, which is learned only in school for some.
Well, a difficult question. So Wolof is acquired orally by most people, but it is not widely learned in schools. There are some mother tongue classes in primary school, but always, with a view at converging to French. So there is no robust literacy, even in Wolof in Senegal. And most people don't use the standard orthography, but they use the French lead writing when they write Wolof. Also because it's mostly used in this mixed register urban Wolof that is very fluid between Wolof and French. So of course, learning literacy in a language that you actually speak is of course completely different from learning literacy in a language that you don't speak and that you have to learn to speak and write at the same time without any dedicated pedagogy to cater for this challenge, right? So in that sense, the children who must do that, they are actually superhumans, I mean, if somebody comes out of school in such a context, with mastery of literacy and the language of instruction, that actually tells you what efficient learners they are. So in comparison, what we do in LILIEMA is a piece of cake, so to speak, right? So yes, in principle, of course, literacy in Wolof would be much easier to achieve. But of course, this is not in your question, but in case you are hinting at that, I think in Casamance, we did some interviews with teachers and also with parents about the use of Wolof because we were interested in what they thought about this. And in some contexts, people were quite flexible and said, yeah, it could be, they could introduce Wolof, although we want our children to learn French because they need it if they want to take part in the formal economy. So French is there to stay, it cannot be replaced. But in other contexts, particularly in Yola speaking areas, so Yola are behind a big political secession that caused a secessionist war that is still flaring up, has been going on for more than 30 years now. In these areas, you want to introduce Wolof, boom, forget it, you will have a violent conflict because Wolof stands for the domination of the North, which became powerful in the wake of French colonization. And so no, and that is one of the big hurdles of introducing these standard-based literacies in, where a language needs to be selected, because it would always become a political issue that some languages are excluded. And this is, I think, also why LILIEMA has been taken up, because it does not force people to select. And so it does not create, languages that are favored, but also it caters for the complex literacy needs because people actually need to communicate in writing to many people with very different linguistic skills.
Yeah. So in our seminar series, we are also really interested in some practical aspects as well. So I'm happy to see some of these questions, which it would be nice to get some input from you on. So one says, could you give or show us some examples of questions included in the surveys when measuring the impact of the COVID-19 material produced for LILIEMA? I'm interested in how you measured impact.
To measure the impact, we had two different kinds of questionnaires, one quantitative and one qualitative. So our LILIEMA teachers and supervisors actually picked people who they wanted to call and do longer interviews with, and there they asked really detailed questions about how people perceive the posters being in the villages, how if they read it, if people are talking about the posters, what feedback they got. And that was with people who have some kind of official position in the village. It might even be like a local shop owner or a local politician or women who work at the health station, because people talk about things that go on in the villages, especially if you put up 2,000 posters. So the other thing was the quantitative questionnaire, and there we had really clearly structured questions that were translated in all of the languages that we are currently, that we currently think are present in this area, or that we had in our LILIEMA courses, and they could be covered by our teachers. And the questions were things like, did you see the material? Did you read the materials? Where do you receive COVID-19 information from? What information do you believe in what language did you access the information? Things like that. You can find the question actually on our website, and there's also a report on how we did the research, because I don't have all of the questions in my head right now.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really good. Could you also then maybe in connection to that tell us something about your setup in the community? Because you go to a community, that's really great in terms of having to put up posters somewhere. Do you have to, who within the community do you have to sort of get permission from or talk to sort of make sure that that's successful?
Yeah, so it is us three here in Europe at the moment, and then we have a team of 7 other people in Senegal who we talk to via phone and WhatsApp regularly. And there are 2 supervisors, so the president of LILIEMA and another supervisor, one east and one west of Sagna. And they are the responsibles for the villages. So they then talk to the teachers, and all of the posters that we have, this is all a group effort. So we have ideas together. We meet regularly on Zoom or talk on WhatsApp and say, okay, what should we do next? And then there's the work is really shared among us. So the people in Senegal, they often do the translations. We discuss a lot what content we want to share and what kind we want to share, that they discuss it with the teachers, but also with people from the villages. And then mainly they send the information in WhatsApp or a picture of transcriptions, and we then put it on posters and put them in a format, send them back to Senegal, and they get them printed. So that works for the posters, and also the research works very, very similar. We develop our ideas together, and then because it's easier to use a computer and internet when you are in Europe, so we do the questionnaires, we do the website, but they always people who are in Senegal, they always check the information and give us input, and then as a team we somehow get the results. But it's a lot of communication and a lot of calling.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I should add to this, so that this collaboration goes back a long time, because we had 2 research projects. So we started in 2010, and we've worked with local transcribers. And in the second project, we decided to actually turn them into real collaborators. So they had half-time positions for the entire duration of the project. And so a kind of professional qualification as multilingual transcribers. And so the idea for LILIEMA came from this transcriber team, which also became the core LILIEMA team. This experience is, I never wrote any of the local languages, and all of a sudden I can write them all. And so this was an experience of empowerment that they described, that we thought, we should actually seize and turn into something. But also we felt that, this is related to really wider research ethics. This extractivist paradigm that we go in with our research interests, take data, put them in an online corpus in Europe, write papers, and then think about giving back. But this idea we had worked with people for such a long time, and we felt our research really needs to have some tangible and sustainable outcome, a legacy that really enables them also to be experts in their own right. Absolutely. and have salaried positions, in the areas where they live. And so then take these 2 together, it seemed like, the obvious thing to do.
Yeah. No, that's really, really, really very good. I'll just ask you a final question, which I'm going to sort of switch around. Somebody was asking about whether this has been done in formal schooling, and we had an answer to that. But part of their question was, how you would engage with teachers and government officials from education department in terms of implementing this in an official domain. But I think I would like to switch that around and sort of say, there's that question, certainly, but since you haven't done it and it's something to think about, but I would like to know whether you have engaged with the sort of official status with the government and with policymakers, and how do people react? There must be an MP in this area. How do they react to the fact that there's this group of people who are coming to do this great thing? Like, is there any a reaction, whether positive or negative? I'm just sort of, yeah, I would be curious to know from that perspective.
Well, the teachers in the villages, they're all lovers. They all invited us to teach in the schools, but as Mia said, the students don't want to go to the schools because these are traumatizing contexts. So the teachers love it, and they're like, oh, we want to have materials like yours. Can you not make materials for us as well? Yeah. The official side is a bit more thorny. I remember we went to present at the Language and Development Conference in Dakar in 2017. And there were really hostile people from the education ministry. So we had to tread very carefully there because we do not fit their notion of literacy and education. And but locally, people are very, very supportive, from the sous-préfet, préfet, governor. So we are a Senegalese-based association now, so we are officially recognized to operate in the Casamance. Mm-hmm. And especially because we were the only ones present during the COVID pandemic to disseminate information in understandable French and in local languages, I think, that gave us a big boost in terms of acceptance.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. There were many more questions. There was indeed somebody asking about the way that the French was represented on the posters was much more like it may be spoken. And there were also a number of really, really very positive comments. People want to use, some of the things and the quotations that you use, really, really very nice things. We are going to post all of this on our website. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much. That was really, really great talk. It also shows that it pays to sort of invest in an area over a long period of time and build those relationships. So that's really, really very nice. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our participants. We hope that we will see you again at our next seminar series in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, Friederike and Miriam and Jérémi.
Thank you for all your questions and encouragement. I responded to some, but we, of course, look us up on the LILIEMA website or at the University of Helsinki and drop us an email. We're happy to continue the conversation. And thanks again, Nancy and Colin and Hannah, for your fantastic webinar series and the research you do.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.